Chapter 1911. Nolace responded with a hum. Now. But I'll need to grab some documentation in order for us to get married. Nolace took a few documents out, and Daisy was shocked. How did you get your hands on them? He chuckled. It's, of course, my father-in-law's doing. He and Colton were at the Goldman mansion today, talking about matters regarding Taylorton. At some point, Nolan asked to talk to him privately. He wanted Nolace to do something in order to commit himself to Daisy and make his position known. And with that being asked, Nolace actually took advantage of the opportunity to obtain her documentation. Daisy did not expect that her father would actually give him her documentation. She thought of something and turned her head away. But you haven't even formally proposed to me yet. He calmly explained, we'll get married first, and I'll give you a wedding proposal after this. I have everything planned out. This made her nervous. She still felt extremely uneasy when this day came. Nolace suddenly approached her and kissed her lips. So, will you marry me? The kiss caught her off guard, her mind went blank, and she nodded. At the city hall. The two of them went through all the formalities and took a photo. The whole process took less than 20 minutes. Daisy held the certificate in her hand and looked at the photo that they had taken at the city hall. She still had not returned to her senses. This seemed to mean that her name and his name would be linked together from now on and for the rest of their lives. It was a subtle and incredible fate, and this would seal their love for a lifetime. Nolace sent her back to the crew. When she was about to get out of the car, he grabbed her and said, "Something is missing." Daisy turned around in confusion. "What is miss, He surprised her by sealing her moist lips. After getting a brief taste of his lips, what was left was his warmth. Daisy's whole face flushed and looked as red as a tomato. He rubbed the corner of her lips with his finger and said in a low voice, "I'll pick you up in the evening." She responded with a hum, probably because her cheeks were too warm. She then pushed the door open and rushed out of the car immediately. Unfortunately, the scene of Daisy getting out of the car caught Mitchell's attention as he was passing by, not far away. Although Mitchell did not face the crisis of being shelved as Susan did and still got to act on the set, his screen time as the male lead was greatly reduced because of that incident. At that moment, he was lucky enough to bump into Daisy as she got out of a mysterious car. Perhaps the daughter of the Goldmans has a secret relationship with some random guy. I have to find out more about this. Daisy returned to the studio and went around but did not see Freya. She asked the staff, and one of them replied, someone asked for her at the lounge. She was startled. Freya doesn't know many people in Basburg, so who would come to see Freya at this time? Could it be James? Daisy went straight to the lounge. The corridor was empty and very quiet. When she heard the voices coming from inside the lounge, she immediately recognized them. It's Colton's voice. She pushed open the door instantly. Freya. What came into her sight was Freya pushing Colton away while Colton took 2 steps backward, regained his balance, adjusted his suit, and frowned. Daisy, don't you know how to knock when you enter a room? How would I know that you? Daisy stared at the two of them suspiciously. Since when did you two get together? If I wasn't mistaken, Colton was kissing Freya, wasn't he? And Freya's flushed cheeks have already betrayed her. All my previous doubts seem to have been explained by what I just saw. I already thought the atmosphere between Colton and Freya was indescribably strange. They not only played me, but things that even I don't know about must have also happened all this while. It's no wonder that Colton would almost always lose his cool whenever I brought Freya up ever since he returned to Zlokova. When Freya arrived in Basburg, he was there to pick her up right away, saying that there was something that he had to resolve with her. Chapter 1912. After Freya left, Colton left without even eating, leaving Miss Peterson behind and saying that something came up and he was busy. It was all fake, wasn't it? It turns out that Colton and Freya's relationship has already developed to this extent. Freya did not expect to be discovered by Daisy. She did not know how to explain it all of a sudden and stood up in embarrassment. Daisy, I'm sorry, we actually... Wait. Daisy raised her hand to interrupt her and took a deep breath. Give me a minute or two. This is too much information for me to handle at once. Have you two been together since long ago? Freya lowered her gaze. You can't consider us to be together. Colton turned to look at her. His eyes dimmed, but he was eerily calm. After a while, he said indifferently, Freya, you don't want to admit it in front of Daisy, do you? Freya remained silent, pursing her lips. It seems that I don't have to explain to you. He turned around, walked away with a sneer, and did not look back. Daisy froze in place as she watched him leave. She then stared at Freya, who was standing in front of the couch. Is there any misunderstanding between the two of them? In the evening, Freya left first. Daisy waited on the spot, and not long after, Nala's car was parked not far away. She got into the car and was concerned about Freya and Colton's affairs, so she looked rather absent-minded. Nole sorted out all the documents in his hands, put them back in a folder, and turned to look at her. What's wrong? She came back to her senses. I'm thinking about Freya and Colton. Nolace chuckled. You know about it already? She was slightly startled and turned her head. Do you know about that too? Nolace leaned back in the seat. I've known about it since way back. Since when did this happen? 3 years ago. So it was after I returned to Zlokova. Daisy was stunned. She pursed her lips and looked out the window. Why are Freya and Colton hiding it from me? It's not like I would stop them from dating each other. Nolace gave off a faint smile. Their relationship is unclear and a little complicated, so that's probably because they themselves don't even know how to open up to you. After saying that, he paused for a few seconds. However, they're the only ones who can digest and resolve these things. It's useless for other people to intervene. Daisy lowered her gaze as waves of thoughts overwhelmed her mind. The car slowly drove into the Taylorton villa. The single-family villa that Nolace had bought for tens of millions of dollars looked luxurious and elegant. It had a simple European-style design and an independent yard and garage. In the villa, green shrubs and plants could be seen everywhere, while pavilions, corridors, rockeries, artificial lakes, and small parks filled up every single corner of the villa. There was a gym and cafe downstairs, so one could enjoy life comfortably. And near Taylorton was the prosperous Wellingston Street. Shopping malls, gourmet food stalls, restaurants, hotels, and entertainment venues could be seen along the street. It was the main reason that provided the people living there with great convenience. The car stopped in the yard, and Nolace opened the door for her. Daisy got out of the car and had to admit that the environment here was quite serene. This neighborhood seemed to have been isolated from the hustle and bustle of the city. She walked into the villa with Nolace and was immediately shocked by the scene in front of her. The interior living space of the villa was a duplex floor, and it was romantically furnished. Her portraits were hung on the porcelain walls. The handrails of the circular staircase were covered with balloons, and the steps were sprinkled with rose petals. If this was a surprise for her, she really was pleasantly surprised. Nolace, are you the one who specially arranged all these? She looked back at the man behind her. Nolace smiled. Would you like to take a look at the bedroom? Daisy ran upstairs, went straight to the bedroom, and pushed open the door. In the bedroom, rose petals were arranged in the shape of a heart on the floor, scented candles were lit around them, and a small box was tied to the thread end of a string of balloons floating on the ceiling. Chapter 1913. It was a ring box. Daisy subconsciously pinched the ring hanging on her necklace. Isn't there a ring already there? This is different. Nolace stopped behind her and smiled. The ring from 3 years ago can only be regarded as a token of love, not an official one. Daisy looked back at him. Isn't that a little too clearly categorized? Nolace walked over, took the ring box off the string, and walked toward her. Daisy could not help but feel nervous and stare at him. He knelt down on one knee in front of her and opened the ring box in his hand. Inside the ring box was a cornflower blue sapphire ring with his name engraved on the surface. Miss Vanderbilt, will you marry me so that we can hold each other's hand for the rest of our lives? But beware, after accepting my ring, you'll lose all chances to get a divorce. Daisy was instantly amused and lowered her head, but her eyes were bloodshot. What kind of marriage proposal is this? Will you? She stretched out her hand. Then, Mr. Knowles, will you help me put the ring on? He smiled and slowly inserted the diamond ring onto her ring finger. The size was just right. Knowles held her fingertips and kissed the back of her hand. I've been waiting for this day, like I've been waiting for a lifetime. Daisy looked at him, and her eyelashes were twitching. As for the hand that he was holding, even the cold ring felt warm. However, the cozy atmosphere was interrupted by the grumbling of Daisy's hungry stomach. She pulled back her hand in embarrassment. I haven't eaten yet. Knowles burst into laughter. I've been negligent. Let's go downstairs. Daisy supported her head with her arms and sat at the dining table, waiting for dinner to be served. She glanced at Knowles cooking in the kitchen and suddenly seemed to be able to appreciate her parents' life after they married. She remembered something, picked up her phone and pointed it at the vase on the table, took a picture of the ring, and posted it on Instagram. Hashtag as promised. Hashtag as soon as this photo was posted, it did not take long for the comment section to go up in flames. Hashtag a diamond ring. OMG. That's too much information to handle. Hashtag damn, if my wifey is making such an official announcement, that means I've just lost the love of my life. Hashtag who just stole my little Daisy. Hashtag Knowles brought the dinner to the table, propped his arms against the table, leaned closer to her, and his gaze landed on the comments. He squinted and asked, Wifey? Daisy's heart skipped a beat. She raised her head and quickly explained, it's a female. All of them call me their wifey. Knowles saw her nervous appearance and approached her. Then what should you call me? Her heart was pumping against her chest as she avoided his blazing gaze. Knowles? He rejected it. Never. She giggled. Honey? Knowles stared at her and said nothing. Being stared at by him made her feel more and more unnatural. As such, Daisy placed her hands against his chest, pushed him away, and lowered her voice. Then what about, hubby? He fondly rubbed the tip of her nose. That's more like it. He took a seat beside her and fetched the dishes onto her plate. Aren't you hungry? Eat then. Daisy put her phone aside and leaned closer as if she was waiting for him to feed her. Knowles delivered some vegetables to her mouth, and she opened her mouth and ate them in one go. Apart from Dad and Waylon, now even my husband cooks delicious meals. Just how much happier can life get? Knowles fetched her a bowl of soup. Will you stay here tonight? Daisy trembled subconsciously. The night arrived. Daisy leaned against the bathtub's edge in the huge bathroom and stared at the ceiling. Although she was now legally married to Knowles, and they were already husband and wife, she was still not mentally prepared for it yet. Are we going to sleep together tonight? Thinking of this, Daisy covered her cheeks. They were so warm that they made her feel dizzy. At that moment, a figure swayed across the frosted glass, and Knowles' voice followed it. Chapter 1914. Daisy shrank into the water in fright and blushed. I'll be done right away. Knowles smiled helplessly. I only want to remind you not to submerge yourself in the bathtub for too long. You might faint from all the heat. After he finished speaking, he put her clothes down. I placed your pajamas at the door, Daisy responded with a faint hum. When the silhouette disappeared, she got up from the bathtub, pulled off the towel, and wrapped her body with it. She then pulled the bathroom door slightly open. The pajamas he had prepared were neatly folded and placed right next to the door. She changed into her pajamas and walked out of the bathroom. Her hair was soaked with water and still wet, and her fair and rosy skin was tightly fitted into the ice silk pajamas. Daisy probed her head into the bedroom. Nolace was sitting on the chaise longue with his legs crossed, covering his forehead with one hand and flipping through a magazine with the other. His gaze was fixed on the magazine, the black ice silk nightgown was loosely tied, and the placket was slightly open, oozing a hint of languidness. The warm yellow floor lamp stood on the velvet carpet, and the warm light was reflected onto his facial outline, brightening half of his face and making his facial features look more well-defined. It was a truly stunning handsomeness that would charm the whole world. When someone claimed that there was a type of appearance that could only be viewed from a distance and not be desecrated, the person must be referring to Nolace. Daisy sighed inwardly. Thank God that even though Nolace lost his memory back then, he still knew that Lisa wasn't me. Otherwise, he would have been Lisa's to own now. Nolace lifted his gaze, pursed his lips, gave off a grin, closed the magazine, and placed it down. Daisy. Huh? She recovered from the trance, turned her head, and met his gaze. She then walked into the bedroom awkwardly. I've finished bathing. After saying that, she was stunned for a moment. Why did that sound as if I've cleaned myself and I'm waiting for him to indulge himself? Nolace reached out to her. Daisy lost control over her feet and started to move as she approached him. He pulled her into his arms and collected all her long hair to the back. Your hair is still wet. She pursed her lips and lowered her gaze. He brushed his fingers through her hair, flung the wet ends, and then picked up a dry towel and wiped it for her. Vigorous heartbeats could be heard clearly, and she did not know if they were his or hers. Daisy, who was trapped in his arms, raised her gaze slightly, and Nolace's face was close at hand. He lowered his gaze, but his eyes were still fixed on the ends of her hair as he carefully dried the ends of her hair. The dimmed, warm light softened his facial outline, turning his profound eyes gently. Daisy's eyelashes twitched as the ambiguous, yet intimate atmosphere tingled her heart. She held the back of Nolace's hand and lowered her head. I'll do it myself. Nolace lifted his eyelids slightly and smiled. This is what a husband should do. The word husband was branded on her heart. It was a very touching thing to hear. Daisy could not help but chuckle. Nolace lifted her chin gently. What are you laughing at? His breath brushed across her face, and Daisy looked at him. I was thinking if you were to have married someone else and not me, would you be so nice to that lady too? No, he stared at her. Because you're the only person in this world that I'll marry. She was startled, and her gaze moved. How do you know that you'll only marry me? What if you didn't meet me later on in your life? Nolace caressed her cheek with his palm and brushed his fingers across the fringe on her forehead. Do you believe in fate? Daisy stared at him. He chuckled hoarsely. Whether I lost my memory or not, I reunited with you in the end, didn't I? Daisy turned her face away. You do know how to brighten my mood. I'll give you that. His smile intensified. Is your mood lifted then? She lowered her eyes and gave off a captivating expression. My mood has indeed been lifted a little. Nolace kissed her cheek and the corner of her lips, then punched her chin with his fingertips and completely sealed her lips. Daisy rested her hands on his shoulders and responded to his kiss. Chapter 1915. After a long time, the two finally separated from each other. Nolace rubbed her lips repeatedly. It's time to go to bed. Daisy became nervous subconsciously. Is it possible that the important moment is already here? Before she could recollect her thoughts, Nolace had picked her up and carried her to the bed. The moment he laid her down, she felt even more uneasy. Nolace tucked her under the blanket, did not take any further action, lay down beside her, and hugged her. Get yourself some sleep already. Good night. Daisy stared blankly at the ceiling. When he said it's time to go to bed, he's only referring to a pure rest. She turned and stared at Nolace. Nolace had closed his eyes, and a trace of tiredness could be seen on his face as if he was really sleepy. Daisy breathed a sigh of relief. That's normal. Arranging all these and decorating the villa must be very tiring. She turned over carefully to face him, snuggled into his arms, and closed her eyes. Outside the window, a beam of moonlight shone on the windowsill. However, it was quiet and warm on the other side of the window pane. At Tenet. Daisy, your official announcement was quite big, huh? It's caused Instagram to be paralyzed for a short while. When Charlie came to the company this morning, all the headlines were about Daisy's suspected official announcement. When that was coupled with the photo of the ring that Daisy uploaded last night, all netizens were trying to guess the identity of Daisy's boyfriend. The fans of Daisy and James even linked the two together, guessing whether the other party was James. Daisy did not expect the photo she posted last night to create such an enormous commotion. She scratched her cheeks in embarrassment. Sorry, I didn't expect it to cause such a huge ripple effect. Charlie took a deep breath. I don't care if you're in a relationship now, or what. After all, you've achieved big success in your acting career. After only 3 years of being in showbiz, you've already won the Best Actress award and been very successful. It'd be a pity if you were to quit the entertainment industry at this moment. I'm not going to quit. I'm just making an official announcement about my marriage. Charlie was stunned. Won't your boyfriend mind that? Many celebrities in the entertainment industry faded out of the industry after the official announcement of their marriage, especially those whose careers were gaining momentum. All of them faded away after marriage and then made a comeback years later, but they had already missed their opportunity. Daisy is an actor who's blessed by God. She's born to act, a natural, not like any of those top celebrities. Falling in love or getting married won't affect her in any way, but it'd be a pity if she were to stop acting because of her marriage, like what happened to Helios Boucher. Daisy explained with a grin, he won't mind, and he supports me very much. Charlie nodded. Okay, then you should arrange your own time well. After the filming of this drama is over, you can pick the projects that you want to accept only for a bit. She grinned, Mr. Johnson, that's very kind of you. Humph, if you keep me worrying about you after that, I won't even give you the chance to rest. He then waved. Okay then, now hurry up and go back to what you were working on before this. Get out of my sight. Daisy got up, walked up to the door, thought of something, and looked back at him. Mr. Johnson, I'll invite you to my wedding banquet when the time comes. Charlie clicked his tongue and waved his hand. Get lost already. She left the office with a smile on her face. She left Tenet through its back door and got into the car quickly. Freya was waiting for her in the car. You've created such a huge commotion with your announcement. If the public were to know that you've gotten married without giving them a heads up, they would surely explode, wouldn't they? Daisy took the lipstick out of her handbag, smeared it in front of the small mirror, and sighed, someone will have to light the fuse sooner or later. Freya approached her. You don't plan to let them know Nala's identity, do you? Daisy paused for a bit, then closed the lid of the mirror. I'm already a public figure. Chapter 1916. Daisy's every move was under scrutiny by the media, and she knew how inconvenient it was to be a public figure. Since Nolace wasn't part of the industry, she feared it would affect him. Freya smiled. You're thinking about your husband after your rom. She blushed. He's my husband. Naturally, I have to protect him. Something came to her mind, so she turned to look at Freya. How's it going with Colton? Freya froze, then looked out the window. Who knows? What do you mean? Colton likes you, and you feel the same too. Isn't that great? It's not as simple as that. Freya lowered her gaze. Daisy, can we keep my relationship with Colton secret from your family? Daisy paused and stared at her. She then leaned back in her seat. Are you worried that my family may be against it? Freya looked around. That's not the reason. Even if the Goldmans accepted her, how long would their relationship last? If the relationship was complicated to begin with, would it even end in marriage? Colton had always been far out of reach and wouldn't clarify things. Freya had to keep guessing, and she was tired of it. He wouldn't bow down to her, and she wouldn't do the same or back down, so he would eventually be tired too. They would end up arguing a lot. He could have made things clear, but he would always make it cynical. It made her feel like she was the one who was chasing him, and that didn't make her feel good. Daisy sighed. Colton's only flaws are his mouth and his ego. Freya chuckled. He really has a huge ego. Exactly. Aren't you looking for a house? I have a villa with a view of the sea. Freya was surprised. Villa? Wouldn't that be expensive then? I don't think I can afford the rent. Daisy smiled and explained that villa was where we lived with my mom when we were children. After she got together with my dad, they sold it. She bought it back now, and it's vacant. I could rent it to you at a lower price, $250 per month, how about that? Given their relationship, Daisy could not charge her anything and just let her stay there. But she knew Freya well enough to know that she wouldn't stay if she didn't have to pay $250 for a villa was a steal. The rental for a fully furnished unit in that area would cost around $750. Freya looked at her. You're undercharging me, aren't you? Daisy waved her hand and said, pay whatever you want then, all right? Freya smiled. Let's make it $300. I don't want it to be too low. Daisy brought her to the Seaview Villa. She hadn't been back here for a dozen years, and a lot had changed. The furniture that was covered with white covering was mostly still new. Freya set down her luggage and looked around the living room. You used to live here? Yes, this was where Mom and we were staying. Daisy opened the windows for better ventilation and walked to the backyard. The bench and plants were still there, but hadn't been pruned after all those years. The plants were overgrown, and the bench was rusted. Freya pulled the covering away, and an old piano was revealed. Chapter 1917. This was for Colton. Freya was surprised. She lifted the cover and stared at the keys. He plays the piano? She wouldn't have guessed that. She had been under the impression that Colton had always been a business person and didn't know about his other interests. This was a side of him that she never knew about. Daisy said Colton was very musically talented and even went to the Royal Academy of Music. He could have become a musician but gave up because he had to take over the family business. Freya was shocked. That's such a waste. It is, but that was his own choice. Daisy looked down. Since Waylon had chosen to train with their great-grandfather overseas, Colton had to give up on music. Even though dreams were important, they had burdens to bear as Goldmans. Freya looked at her and seemed to understand why she wanted to be independent. It was because of her two brothers. She had always been pampered at home, but that didn't make her a spoiled brat. She probably wanted to be as outstanding as her brothers. At Black Gold, Giselle walked to the administrative department with a document. The people there knew that she was the daughter of Mr. Peterson, so they were very polite toward her. She was a gentle person and wasn't stuck up, so she left a good impression too. Miss Peterson is such a nice and hardworking person. Do you think that she will become Mrs. Goldman one day? Black Gold and Cloud Capital have a stable partnership, and they come from similar backgrounds, so they're a good match. It's highly possible. The employees chatted and speculated if she would marry into the family since Colton had let her shadow Leonardo. She probably had gotten permission to work with the finance department. Giselle stopped in front of the office, knocked, and entered after getting permission. She stopped in front of the desk and handed the documents to Colton. Here are the documents that Leonardo asked me to collect. I've calculated the commission bonuses for next month. Colton took them and skimmed through them. The employees' bonuses were calculated every quarter by the finance department. Even though Giselle was learning from Leonardo, she had a knack for numbers, so they let her get involved with financial management too. Colton didn't find any problems with them, so he signed the documents. Giselle looked at him and pressed her lips together. I told my father that I'm happy with you, so he asked Mr. Goldman for his opinion. I'm sorry, Colton replaced the cap of the pen and handed the signed documents back to her. It's an honor, but you're an outstanding woman. I'm pretty sure you have a lot more options. Giselle's hand froze in midair. She then looked down and smiled. I'm guessing I'm not in your consideration? She was good at reading subtle signals because of how she was brought up. What Colton said was pretty much a rejection. After spending time with him, she still didn't understand him. From what people could see, he was very nice toward her, but she knew he was just being polite. Chapter 1918. That friendliness only extended to strangers and not friends. Friends showed emotions, but Colton never paid attention to her emotions. Even if her father never asked for his opinion before speaking to Nolan, he didn't say much about it. I'm curious about the kind of woman that would interest you. Colton looked around. Is it that important to you? Giselle was honest. If I'm not even in your consideration, I'm curious about the woman that you would fall for. She must be much better than I am. And maybe that was the reason he never thought about her that way. If that woman was really outstanding, Giselle wouldn't feel so bad about it. Colton was silent. There were a lot of outstanding women. Giselle, for example, was one of them. She came from a great family and was disciplined and always learning. She was a good example of a lady. A woman like her would be a great wife because she would be able to manage the household and help him with his business, but if a woman had to be outstanding for him to consider, Freya would be far from that. She had a temper and was stubborn. Her family was a mess, and she wasn't gentle, but that was the woman he had fallen for. He suddenly thought that it was funny and laughed. Giselle was surprised. Mr. Goldman? Colton paused and reverted to his neutral expression. The peal of laughter a moment ago seemed like an illusion. There aren't that many outstanding women, but even if they aren't exceptional, they have their own positive traits. How can we measure performance when it comes to life partners? Do they have to be from a good family to be considered good? Giselle was stunned by the question. I didn't know you'd think about it from that perspective. She couldn't deny that coming from a good family would make one outstanding, but based on Colton's background, it was hard not to think that family mattered. Colton loosened his tie and leaned back on his chair. If there's nothing else, I have things to tend to. Giselle nodded, then left. After she walked out of the office, she remembered that moment when Colton's mind wandered, and she had an idea. He had a crush on someone. That made her even more curious about what the woman was like. Colton received a text from Daisy in his office. He read through it and froze. At the villa. Freya and Daisy cleaned the entire house together. It took them 2 to 3 hours, and they now lay on the couch, out of energy. Daisy looked at the clean and tidy living room. This was the first time I cleaned up. That gave quite a sense of accomplishment. Right? Cleaning up can be a happy activity, especially when I'm not happy. I will be a lot less annoyed when I'm distracted, Freya said with a smile. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Daisy sat up. I'll get it. She walked to the door and opened it to see Colton outside. Colton, you're here so soon. Colton tapped her forehead. That was the first time he felt like praising her. Good job. Daisy stuck out her tongue. It's nothing. Freya suddenly realized what was happening and got up. Daisy Vanderbilt. Daisy put on her shoes hurriedly. Freya, I'm leaving. Bye. After she went out, she closed the door. Freya was annoyed because Daisy had asked Colton to come over behind her back. Chapter 1919. When did she start working together with Colton? Colton removed his coat and hung it in the closet. Why didn't you tell me that you moved? Freya crossed her arms. Someone would tell you anyway. Colton looked around the living room. He was so familiar with this place. He stopped in front of the piano and looked down. Did Daisy ask you to live here? She smiled. Why else would I be here? She then added, I'm not living here for free. I'm paying rent. He paused and turned to look at her. Freya didn't have anything that she should be proud of, but she was still so confident. Her confidence came from her character. She was never greedy and wouldn't take advantage of others. She paid for everything so nobody would get to tell her how to get things done. Colton stared at her for a moment. "How much is the rent?" She paused, then looked away. "I'll pay whatever I have." She then remembered something. "I'm not paying it to you." "Why do you care?" He chuckled. "I don't want you to take advantage of my sister. If I want to, it's none of your business either. I'm her brother, don't I get a say?" Freya turned to go upstairs. Colton rushed forward and grabbed her. "I'm not here to start an argument." She smirked and turned around. "No, but you're here to pick a fight." Colton was rendered speechless. Freya tried to shake him off, but he had a firm grip. "Can't you just?" He looked uneasy. "Compromise?" Freya couldn't believe her ears and looked at him in surprise. "You're a man, but I'm the one who has to compromise." He didn't speak. Freya shook his hand off and turned to face him. "Colton, this is how you court a woman? You're so far from being a gentleman." Colton was worked up. "I'm not a gentleman? Why can't you be gentle?" Her face dropped. "Do you like women who are gentle?" Isn't Miss Peterson a gentlewoman? Since you're both single, you'll make a good match and have a great life together." Freya ran up the stairs. Colton froze for a few seconds. Something came to his mind, and it made him chuckle. He yelled upward, "Are you jealous of Giselle?" Freya's voice came from upstairs. "If you can't speak properly, leave." Colton walked upstairs and leaned against the door while watching her put her clothes into the closet. She seemed to be angry and pretended not to see him. Women really were hard to understand. It was so tough for him to even appease his sister's anger, but Freya was even harder. He walked closer and took some hangers. Freya paused and watched while she watched him slowly hang up her clothes. At that moment, the silence was uncomfortable. They were like an old married couple. She pressed her lips together because she didn't know what to say. When he accidentally picked up her undergarments, she immediately snatched them and hid them. Her ears turned red while she said, "I don't need your help here." Colton raised his brows. "I've seen you naked, but you're worried about me seeing that?" She choked. "You." Colton saw how much she was blushing and teased her when he noticed how shy she was about it. "We're alone here." Chapter 1920. Freya tried to hit Colton, but he quickly grabbed her wrist and held her against the closet. She couldn't push him away. "Colton, have you no shame?" Colton raised her chin and stared at her flushed face. "I've never been ashamed." Freya didn't know what to say. He lowered his head and kissed her. He just wanted to tease her, but it escalated quickly. He was familiar with her body, but if Freya didn't have feelings for him, she wouldn't just let him get his way. That was the only time they had the same thing in mind. After a week, at the party to celebrate the end of their filming, Daisy attended the party. There were a lot of reporters at the door, and they rushed forward when Daisy and James showed up together. "Miss Vanderbilt, who was the man you mentioned in your social account? Can you tell us a bit more about him?" James wanted to say something when Daisy pinched his arm. He took a sharp breath and smiled but didn't speak. Daisy calmly said, "I'm sorry, but my fiancé doesn't like to be under the spotlight. I hope that everyone will respect his privacy." A reporter asked, "Are you engaged?" Daisy affirmed. The reporter continued, "Is he in the industry too?" Daisy smiled and replied, "No." The reporter had more questions, but James spoke up. "When is it my turn? I'm the lead too. Why don't you ask about me? I'll gladly talk about my private life." James looked like he was ready to be interviewed and was very enthusiastic about it. The reporters were ashamed. Daisy took the chance and escaped into the event hall. Mitchell was drinking with the assistant director, and when he saw Daisy walking over, He raised his glass and walked toward her. Miss Vanderbilt. Daisy turned to look at him. Hi. I'd like to apologize to you for causing trouble after listening to Susan. He raised his glass. Daisy picked up a glass of champagne with a lower alcohol content. Apology accepted. She then took a sip. Mitchell slowly sipped his wine. I'm quite impressed that you made an official announcement. I'm curious who would be good enough to be your soulmate. Daisy looked down. Was he trying to make her talk? Do you care about my partner? He smiled. How could I not? The fiancé of a Goldman must be someone important. She smiled and said, not at all. He's just a normal person. The grandson of a king who was handsome, rich, talented, and a gentleman was just normal. Mitchell didn't buy it. She was trying to hide his identity. The more Daisy wanted to hide it, the more he would want to find out. There weren't a lot of people who could be a match for her in Basburg. If that weren't the case, the media wouldn't be interested. If he really could find information about this, he might be able to become relevant again. When the party ended, it was already 10 p.m. Even if Daisy only drank champagne with low alcohol content, her face turned red after drinking a few glasses. She wasn't a good drinker. Her face would turn red even from beer, because her blood would circulate faster.